Hi, I'm Cate Blanchett, and I'm back again to talk about a few more films that speak to hope. And I think we're all feeling quite unmoored at the moment. But for me, story and cinema and film can help us to feel less unmoored and more connected. And I have the good pleasure to be with an astonishing and singular filmmaker, James Gray, whose body of work I deeply admire. And one of his favourite films, and one of the films that I have recently been rewatching, is The Immigrant. I'm so happy to have you here to speak with me, James. I wish I was with you in person. How are you?
Thank you for being my fan, Kate. You'd be the
one fan. You have many fans. I'm a long line.
How am I doing? Well, this is like insane. I mean, how am I doing? I'm trying to.
Clearly, there's so many questions I want to ask you. Like, who does your hair? Is the first question. Fabulous.
My hair? No, nobody's doing my hair. Nobody's doing much of anything right now except sort of a controlled rotting. Which I'm not an expert at. And I got, 400 kids, 3, but it feels like 400.
Look, I mean, I feel blessed to have my family around me. And, of course, I've been thinking about those who don't, who are kind of far from home, and refugees, who are constantly, the average time that they're away from their place of origin is kind of 19 years, and trying to place myself inside that experience. But the thing for me, I found this whole thing incredibly surreal and dreamlike. And I've been watching films that I've loved, but it's like I'm watching them through a different prism now. So to say, for the first time, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I'm going to talk to you about The Immigrant, obviously, which is an extraordinary film, Marion Cotillard. But I watched it again the other night, and I watched it through the prism of this experience that we're all going through. And it was like a dream or a nightmare. I mean, obviously, the title, The Immigrant, it speaks to all the fragilities and challenges that come with moving from one place and trying to set up a new life in another place. But it was like a nightmare.
When you say nightmare, I remember being very conscious of like a whole bunch of movies about the immigrant experience, especially in the United States. And it was not my experience of my grandparents' experience. They had equal parts optimism and tremendous sadness at leaving their home.
Yeah.
And there's a great writer, Irving Howe, his name is, and he wrote at length, about the immigrant experience in this way, which I felt was a kind of a more nuanced, dare I use that word, approach, because it was not a romanticized approach. I think that's probably why you say it's nightmarish. For me, there is hope for what happens to her at the end, and he does redeem himself in some way. But I didn't want to idealize it. I also, of course, stole from movies that I loved that were more nuanced in this way. But the real drive was to do something personal and almost, not for me, but autobiographical.
Even though the Immigrant was so harrowing to watch, it did, the final images of it, of escape and
happily in some way.
Yeah, it did leave me strangely hopeful. And I'm wondering, were there any films that either you've been watching along that theme yourself, or that inspired you to make the film?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. There's a beautiful film by Elia Kazan called America, America, which is a very autobiographical movie about Kazan's ancestors. And he had written actually the book, too. It's an epic film about that winds up with this young man migrating to the United States. And a deeply, deeply moving film. And for the people who are watching this, if you haven't seen that, I do believe it's readily available, and it's a great movie, a long movie and an epic film and a great film. And by the way, Godfather 2 also takes from that film. The other film that was very important to us, La Strada, La Strada is so beautiful, and La Strada is not directly about immigration, and yet.
But she is. I mean, she is. Yes, she's been taken away.
Yes, because she is exactly right. She is essentially stolen by this brutal, horrible sort of a low grade circus strongman, brilliantly played by Anthony Quinn, and she's a genius too. The actress's name is Giulietta Messina, and she was the wife of Fellini. And one of the things that I took away from that movie and stole completely, and if you look at La Strada in a way, it's very obvious, that there's a kind of a false hope in the Richard Basehart character, just as I wanted the false hope to be in this Jeremy Renner figure, who Jeremy plays a kind of very kind of sleazy guy, but likes to present himself as Mr. Charming, but is probably deeply troubled. But the idea behind the film La Strada is so gorgeous, because a very Franciscan idea, which is that everyone has a purpose in the eyes of God. Now, I'm not a religious person, but in art, I'm sort of religious, and that film's beauty is in expressing the ultimate extension of our sympathies towards all the people in it. And ultimately, no matter how brutal and bruising Anthony Quinn is, the film still comes back to a certain hopefulness, because it ultimately is about love and tenderness, and the expression or inability to express that love, and how everybody and everything is worthy of love. Now, that is a beautiful idea, I think, and that was really what we tried to steal from the Fellini as much as we could. So what the cinema hopefully brings is a specificity to an experience, so that it's almost like putting if you put a specific story to the experience, it's no longer just a number of people. It's no longer an abstraction.
It's overwhelming, yeah.
It feels like a tangible thing. So, for example, if you say, a tragedy happened in Cambodia in the 1970s and millions of people died, it's like an abstraction. But if I show you the movie The Killing Fields, you sort of begin to get some kind of understanding of what it might mean.
No, film is such a great entry point for people in an empathetic way. I mean, I never think about film as being an educational medium. So you're not there for a history lesson, but you're there for a chance to connect with an experience that's outside your own. And I love La Strada. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it, but I want to go back and see it again because of what your takeaway from it. And that's what I love about films, and going back to revisit films that I've loved. Now that we're going through this really like a turning, we're at a fork in the road as a species, this thing that we're all going through together, that somehow the films that you feel like you look at it in an entirely fresh way. And so it's a great time to kind of revisit those books and those stories and those songs and those operas, because I think we can look at things afresh, when we're in a confronted.
I will say this not to be too sententious. I've quoted this many times, but it is I have it on a card in the house above my desk as I work. It's from the great writer George Eliot. She said, and I've said this many times, so forgive me if you've heard me say this already, but she said, the thing we owe the artist is the extension of our sympathies. And so it's like, and the reason I love that is because, in a sense, it gives value to everything we're talking about, which is, it is the ultimate trial, the ultimate need, the ultimate desire that we have as filmmakers or painters or sculptors, musicians, anything in any artistic endeavor, if I use that dirty word, to try and lend sympathy towards an experience because it's the closest thing we can get to being in somebody else's consciousness. And so that's the whole point. That's the whole reason we do it. It's the expression of a collective feeling. And so to feel that, what did I say? To fit in, to feel less alone. This is what great movies, this is what great art can and should do. That is the point of it.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I do think that film allows us to connect. I mean, and some of us are here, if we're lucky enough to be with our nearest and dearest, but some of us are actually in total isolation as a singular unit. And I know, for one, I'm craving the desire to go to a cinema and sit with a bunch of people and collectively share a movie. But for now, I guess we have to try and reconnect individually through stories that speak to our common humanity. And I mean, for me, The Immigrant is right up there. So thanks, James. And thanks for allowing me to bore you with my fangirl fandom.
I love you, Cate. I'm hanging up.
Bye. Be well. And I hope all of you at home are safe and healthy, as are your loved ones, because COVID-19 has affected all of our communities. And I join with the chorus of thank yous to our incredible key workers, those working in health and social care, those working in supermarkets and public services, and all of the volunteers out there who are helping the most vulnerable. Because the virus has revealed just how interconnected our lives are and underscored the importance of simple kindness and community and having a sense of belonging. But of course, for many refugees who are forced to flee their homes because of conflict or persecution, this pandemic is an additional terrifying threat. And the much-needed UNHCR field workers are staying and delivering support and getting out life-saving supplies and vital information to these vulnerable people. But the virus and related economic downturns and border closures are making things really, really tough right now. And the UNHCR has been protecting refugees for nearly 70 years. So while you continue the difficult task of supporting your own families and communities and key workers, if you do feel able, it would be just wonderful if you could support UNHCR to assist the vulnerable refugees, because we're in this together. And your voice really does matter in challenging discrimination and inaccuracies. And your donation, no matter how small, will make a huge, huge difference. So you can give at UNHCR.org/COVID. And I hope that our conversation today has maybe sparked for you a conversation about what your Films of Hope watch list might be. And I would love to know what they are. So stay safe and thanks for watching.